ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. C.S. Biju, who is going to present his paper on variola venus, a case of somatic imagination in 19th century drama. Dr. C.S. Biju and I have been very good friends for the last couple of decades. A product of the very well known St. Joseph's College of Theology in Calicut and the English Department of Kannur University in Palayar, Tellicherry. Dr. Biju has been working in the Department of English in St. Thomas College, Biju, for quite some time now. Apart from being a very well-known erudite, academic and teacher, he has also made his mark as a practitioner and a theorist in the field of drama and theatre. The recipient of the Fulbright and Charles Wallace and Shastri International Fellowships. In fact, he is a recipient of multiple recognitions from various international agencies, particularly for his work in the field of theatre. He has travelled abroad quite a lot and has held workshops and seminars in various parts of the world, including Europe and Singapore in particular. His other academic activities include the publishing of a journal named Conspectus from the Department of English, St. Thomas College, Biju. He has very regularly contributed not only to his own the journal edited by himself, but also to several other journals, as also to compilations of articles, particularly in the field of drama and theatre. He has also been a visiting faculty at Vishwabharati University in Calcutta and School of Drama in Biju, and not of course to speak of Shanti Niketan. Obviously, his will be a presentation that we all would look forward to with great eagerness. Now, with great pleasure, I welcome Dr. Biju to make his presentation on 19th century drama in India. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is, of course, a wonderful privilege to participate in this seminar to honor our dear friend, eminent teacher and scholar, Professor A.M. Krishnan. He is one of the pioneering professors and administrators in our university systems. I'm immensely happy and thankful to the director, Dr. Jose Manuel, and Dr. Saji Matthew, the coordinator of the program, for inviting me to this auspicious occasion. My paper in this context focuses on exploring spectacles of pain and suffering in a play written in Malayalam in the 19th century, without specifying any particular production, in an effort to examine imaginations of body in 19th century Malayalam. The vantage ground from which the explicit body is in representation is viewed is another play written by a late 20th century contemporary woman playwright. The Malayalam play is Mariamma Nadagam, written in 1878 approximately, as per the author's own pronouncement, and published in 1903. The contemporary play is Venus, published in 1996 by Susan Lowry Parks. This paper is a work in progress, and I have not yet finished structuring its actual methodology and prospects. Susan Lowry Parks' play Venus adapts the story of Saji Bosman, a Khoi woman who was popularly known as the Hout and Hout. It was actually an offensive title for Khoi people, and it was a colonial coinage. Venus, the Hottentot Venus in 19th century Europe. Her body was exhibited in Europe between 1810 and 1814 in some sort of freak shows as part of Europe's obsession with her buttocks. The play details Batman's experience with all turbulences and contradictions of her life, and addresses Batman's exploitation in the backdrop of colonial history and racism. Although much scholarship has been centered on Batman, little is known about the specifics of her exhibition and background. Most accounts agree that she was born in Kafararia, an interior of Cape Colony of South Africa in 1788, and that around the age of 21 or 22, she agreed to work in England and Ireland for Alexander Dunlop and Henrik Seyss, performing domestic duties and being exhibited publicly. She was exhibited in London, 225 Piccadilly, from 1810 to approximately 1814, after which she parted company with Seyss in Paris when he sold her to a showman of wild animals named Sarou. Roux's profession of showing animals is illustrative of how Batman was exhibited and likely treated at this time. She continued to be shown as an object of curiosity in France until her death in 1815. Many accounts describe her exhibition as forced, noting that she was fed cantice to entice her to leap about and sing. After her death, her body was dissected by George Cuvier, a French naturalist who had, prior to her death, submitted Batman to a 3-day medical examination in March 1815. Cuvier, in his attempt to contribute to the Enlightenment scientific support for the theory of the great chain of being, presented his observations of Batman's body before his colleagues, and through the analysis of her steatopygia, or something like protruding buttocks, and her genitalia, all which lay the Hottentot apron, he categorized her to the orangutan in order to establish the black woman's position as the lowest human species. As a result of her inhuman treatment during life and after death, Batman has captured the imagination of scholars and artists alike as they grapple with the historical and present implications of how blacks are viewed in the West. For many, the fact that Musée de l'Homme had custodial rights, was in Paris, had custodial rights to her remains for a significant period of time reflect the way in which the slave trade and colonization made black bodies objects of possession by the Western whites. Due to the public outcry to return Bachmann's remains to South Africa, in 2002, she was repatriated to South Africa and received a proper burial. These are all historical facts from the works of various scholars. Bachmann's life and the public fascination with her is memorized in many works, notably in 1814 vaudeville play La Venus Hottentot, Oaks Francois, that is the Hottentot Venus or the Hatred of French Women, written by Messier d'Artois and Brassier. This work was designed to present a sharp contrast between Bachmann and French women who were threatened by French men's intense curiosity about Venus. Susan Laurie Potts handles the case of Bachmann by placing her in an exact context of history of racism by critiquing the spectatorial practices involved in her life in Europe. This is accomplished by creating the tension related to the act of looking and immediately suggesting to the audience that it's not an act of engaging in being in a benign witnessing. There are two important productions of Venus. The first is directed by Richard Foreman for the Joseph Parr Public Theatre in New York, produced by George C. Wolfe, the then director of Joseph Parr Public Theatre in New York. The second is a 2017 production of Venus by Signature Theatre Company, New York, which I myself was a spectator. This play employs the literal and figurative meanings for beginning at tail end of the story as a reference to the long-standing fascination with the attacks of Sarah Bachmann. Tail end is actually a quote from the beginning of Susan Laurie Potts' Venus, play Venus. Potts uses this play in words as an opening to tell the larger story about Bachmann and her experience of being exhibited in London, Paris, posthumously in the Museum de Louvre. In her initial problematizing of the act of looking, Potts creates a dynamic that requires the audience to shift its perspective constantly and to think continually about its participation in the spectacle. In doing so, Potts also provides a larger context for her subversive depiction of the complex relationship between the gaze and spectacles of pain in the work. One key way that Potts intensify the experience is by recasting Bachmann's body not as an object of curiosity but as a body inflicted with pain. Although Potts has been criticized for minimizing the significance of Bachmann's exploitation, the play makes it clear that Bachmann experienced various forms of abuse during her exhibitions. Susan Laurie Potts captures the historically prevailing views of Bachmann as object to be feared, reviled, sexualized, most notably through her depiction of the chorus. Referred to simply as chorus, the audience within the play becomes central to the work as Bachmann herself. In fact, the chorus transforms into other choruses, such as the chorus of the eighth human wonders, the chorus of spectators, the chorus of the court, and so on, as a way to illustrate the multiple gazes to which Bachmann was subjected. The primary chorus's behavior at the opening of the play signals the various emotions associated with Batman's body. The crucial difference in the portrayal of Mariamma and Venus is that in Mariamma Nadagam, the spectacle never realized the tension between the spectacles of pain and suffering and the process of looking at the spectacle from the perspective of someone who can easily empathize with the character. The signification of the spectacle, historically or culturally, do not evince anywhere in the play. The gaze itself is transformed into a performative act in Venus, critiquing the history of racialized gaze. In Mariamma Nadagam, gaze imbricates the hegemonic male power and the subject gazed upon by the other. Mariamma Nadagam was written as the first social reformative independent play, in quotes, in Malayalam by Polichurikal Kochivan Tharagan, based on mother-in-law fight prevalent in Christian families in southern Kerala. Kallur Umman Philippos's Almaratam appears to be the first Nadaka Katha in Malayalam, though it was an adaptation of Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors. Mariamma was published in 1903 because it was an independent story with a social reformative message. Mariamma Nadagam is considered to be the first independent play. And it was published in 1903, 25 years after its writing. There are more than 20 characters, including Chempakasheri Maligile Matachan and his wife Ausepachan, and his wife and son Ausepachan, and Ausepachan's wife Mariamma. Mariamma has a brother named Stephen. He happened to be a doctor. Matachan's wife was not given in the play, given a name in the play to privilege the heroine Mariamma. The patriarch Matachan is so naive to believe that his wealth is renowned in the nearby villages, but he is completely under the control of his wife. Mariamma's mother-in-law is portrayed as an evil incarnation stereotype who employ physical torture as a means of subordination and control. The playwright is very particular about exploring dimensions of men's domestic violence practiced over Mariamma in his effort to curb the evil practice of mother-in-law fight and domination to project a social reformative message. The catastrophic scene consists of Mariamma infected with smallpox and abandoned at Chempakasheri Maliga because everybody left Mariamma alone with one maidservant for help. For further dismay, the mother-in-law commissioned 3 villains who act as shamans in the play to murder in the context of the epidemic. I wish to focus on the scenes of smallpox and the narratives on the epidemic to explore certain questions of body and the role of expressions of pain as a spectacle in defining spectatorial desire and otherness in 19th century Malayalam. Susan Laurie Parks attempted to reinterpret the images of inflicting pain and images of exhibition and torture in the larger context of race, colonialism, and history of slavery, specifically in the context of Europe's unconscious desire. Variola virus, which spreads smallpox, which is also known as variola major, is taken as a metaphor to connect the expressions of immense pain and torture of Mariamma with Venus's life, because it problematizes the body as source of evil and trauma. Trauma and otherness as central to the the construction of the character of Mariamma and Venus. Venus's body was exhibited in major cities in Europe, and even after her death, her body was subjected to autopsy and medical examinations. As I told you earlier, Mariamma's body is interrogated through the effect of the virus and also through the subsequent valorizations of modern medicine. Because her brother Stephen was a doctor by profession who rescues her from the death trap. And the intervention of jurisprudential system epitomized in the present through the appearance of the policeman. The presence of these two phenomena are categorically imperative in any discussions on 19th century Kerala from a number of reasons, including these two factors are quintessential in envisaging any society undergoing a process of modernization. The spectacles of excruciating pain and suffering in the case of both Mariamma and Sarah Barsman illustrate the spectatorial desire which desires the desire of his author. The author, P.K. Taragan, in his preface to Mariamma Nadagam, states the reasons for his reluctance to publish the play. He was full of the prospects of the play in comparison with the existing conventions of playwriting in Malayalam in 19th century. Specifically, the adaptations of Sanskrit plays and themes from the epics and the imitations of the ballet form, which was often mimicked in public by a number of important critics. Outside the spectrum of the theatrical conventions and rhetoric, the playwright was experimenting with designing characters who are outside the purview of literature and other arts in 19th century Kerala. The character of Mariamma instills this experiment in shaping up the other of the stereotypes of Kerala modernity and the envisaged Renaissance perpetuated through print culture, religious practices, medicinal and educational endeavors. The character of Mariamma and her epitome of suffering with smallpox have at most significance at this point. The disease spread out in the wake of movements of people all around the world through warfares and colonization throughout history. From 16th century onwards, European settlers and soldiers have been responsible for the spread in the colonies in Africa, America and Asia. Studies on the history of the epidemic in South India reveals the fact that the virus was introduced by Europeans, and the southwestern tract of the continent appeared to be an ideal ecology in course for the spread with its dense population. In the book Travancore Tribes and Castes, variola virus was considered as the major reason for death in Travancore and Cochin. The disease has been variously interpreted as the curse of Bhadrakali, Vasurimala, Mariamman, etc. It's quite evident that there were no proper medication before Edward Jenner's vaccination, and indigenous medicinal practices have prescribed nothing except Margusa leaves, though Ayurveda offered proper descriptions of smallpox. Quantitative and quarantine was also prescribed as a finest remedy for smallpox. In case of incurable extremes, patients were abandoned and sometimes buried alive. This is the context where smallpox was brought in as the central metaphor for extensive display of images of pain and suffering in Mariamma Nadakam. Most of the historical details described here are adopted from Aparna Nayar's article on vaccination Travancore and Devagi Nilayangad's memoirs. The ninth act of the play, Mariamma Nadakam, explores in detail the fierce shamanistic practices and the brutality of the practitioners who are actually the assistant of the shaman Shankaramurti. The intoxicated shaman Shankaramurti and his assistants broke open the doors and opened up agonizing cold-blooded torture over Mariamma, and finally she got fastened with rope to be annihilated. The theatrical interpretation of Vasuri and subsequent brutal treatment of victim is the exact purview of exploring the imagined bodies in 19th century. Trauma, of course, is a point, a caption, as Lacan describes it, which does not offer any comprehensive signification or meaning, but it brings home the idea of the visual language of a cultural trauma associated with the unconscious of 19th century Malayalam. Mariamma's spectacle of trauma is invariably interlaced with the shamanistic ecstasies in which women are victimized and bruised and sometimes extinguished completely. Traumatizing women is a spectacle of torture and pain which involves the process of desiring what is essentially absent in the other. The ninth act of Mariamma Nadakam instills trauma as well as socio-political questions, which represent the spectatorial gaze in search of the essential but yet brutal lack in the other. This event comprises of all scenarios the spectator subject establishes between himself and the other and interprets as the brutal lack within the other and the fluctuations of other self. For instance, Mariamma remains subservient to the authority of her mother-in-law even after the attempts on her life. This implies Mariamma's radical breakup, this implies the radical breakup with Mariamma's historical context, using the strategy of phantasm, a stable way of defending the subject against a lack in the other, to use Lacanian modalities. To use a rhizomatic approach in studying spectacles of trauma in Mariamma Nadagam and Venus, it is necessary to historicize both the characters. Venus in terms of gender, race, colonialism, and history of transatlantic slave trade, and Mariamma in terms of gender, caste, the interventions of colonial political space in an emerging modernity of male subjects. The infected body of Mariamma is terribly brutalized in the gaze of the male spectator subject, who is actually the emissary of light and of social progress. Mariamma's body of men's torture, disease, hatred, and rivalry, which is traumatized under the gaze of the voyeur spectator, represents the docile, inferior, and imagined body of the late 19th century. The spectacles, the spectacular features of the expressions of pain and suffering are invariably intertwined with the cultural history of women in the wake of a rising modernity, and it represents the imploding systems of values, principles, and political assumptions within the framework of improbable promises of future. Thank you very much for your patience. I'm happy to have a Q&A session after the paper. Thank you very much.